Welcome. It's 12:30. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being videoed. Members of the public are entitled to film the proceedings, provided they comply with Shropshire Council terms and conditions, which are available today at the far end of the room. If you are filming for commercial purposes, you must have first gained permission, without which you may not proceed. Any member of the public who has any concerns should raise them now. I don't think there's any members of the public here, are there? Only in the press. Oh, there we go. Item 1, apologies for absence. I've got William Butler, and I think that's the only one. Item 2, disclosable pecuniary interests. Nothing. Item 3, the minutes of the 19th. We're all happy they're a true and accurate record. Seconded. All in favour? Thank you. No public statements, no matters from scrutiny, no reports from scrutiny. Item 7, revenue outturn. Michael.
The revenue outturn report shows a net underspend of £390,000 for 2013-14. This was an improvement of £980,000 since the position was reported at period 11 and reflects the continued action undertaken by all service areas to contain and overturn overspends identified earlier within the financial year. As a result of this improved position, the general fund balance stands at 14.5 million. This is helpful given the significant level of savings required in the budget strategy for 2014-15. The housing revenue account has also delivered an underspend for the year of 1.4 million, which increases the HRA reserve to 2.5 million. Earmarked reserves and provisions have decreased by 10.5 million over the last 12 months and now stand at 51.9 million. The schedule of these balances is detailed in Appendix 4 to this report. School balances have increased marginally, which reflects an increase in primary school balances held. Therefore, Leader, I move the recommendation A to D inclusive.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I'll second that. And can I just say, to achieve the underspend this year of 400,000 is quite incredible, and well done, Clive, to you and all your officers. Particular reference to James and his team, if you can pass that on. But all the directors did a cracking job, and I'm delighted, so well done. Thank you all. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. The report contains some details about the runway contract and some £1 million that were sort of went adrift in terms of managing the contracts, and some revenue items that were brought to capital and some items that were not paid from the year before. Can we have some assurance that that contract is not any more nasty surprises in it and that is all under control? The second item I just wanted to mention was that the council does stand open to some accusation of cutting too hard, given that it now has a surplus in its budget, and that we are putting quite a lot of monies into reserves. People feel that with things like youth services being cut, that perhaps not all of these cuts are as necessary as they might have seemed. Could you please make some comment on that? Thank you.
Certainly, I'll comment on the revenue first. Yes, you can have that reassurance. Secondly, we have to find £40 million this coming 12 months. And the fact that we have an underspend gives us a head start. Now, if you'd like to suggest you have an opportunity at the budget meeting to come forward with amendments to our budget, but to be truthful, neither yourselves nor Labour or anybody came forward with any other ideas. 40 million in the next 12 months is going to be a challenge, and actually to everybody in this, certainly everybody I talk to seems to find it very easy to spend money, but it's a lot more difficult to save money. And unfortunately, because of the situation we find ourselves in, we have to find 40 million. To me, it would seem common sense to keep bolstering up the reserves, because if there's any slippage in the next 12 months, we've got that to fall back on. I think not to do that would be incredibly risky. But again, as I said at the budget meeting, you had an opportunity to come forward with a suggestion.
May I reply? I think the point is a question of balance, isn't it? We all recognise that there's savings that have to be made, and we all recognise that it's difficult circumstances. You could go too far in that you could do a lot less than perhaps we were planning to at the moment and save even more. The question really for the public is the council actually putting too much in reserves? Is it just being a little too fierce? Could it make a step closer towards the zero budget in the flexibility that happens over the coming couple of years while you're finding these savings? There will be some successes that leave you with greater savings than you expected. If these are always going to be put into reserves, then
So
the public have a right to say...
So you genuinely believe, you're sitting there and you genuinely believe that we're likely to save more than 40 million in the next 12 months?
You've seen it in this year's budget. I imagine it happens in every year's budget, in that you make greater savings in some areas and you have greater expenditure in other areas, or in areas where you have greater expenditure, you then have to find that from somewhere else. So in running a budget, you never hit zero exactly on the nose. You're always going to be a little bit to one side or the other. And you could plan to do things a little differently. The question that the public will want to know the answer to is, are you always going to take any savings and put them into reserves and continue to do that when people are feeling that some things, are too tight already, transport costs, the way adult social care works for, their relatives and all that sort of thing. The question is always, is your approach always going to be to put these savings into reserves? At what point are you going to say, no, we can actually spend some of this?
There's a couple of points. First, a history lesson. I know you're relatively new to the council. This isn't being patronising, so please don't take it that way. But if you look back historically, I can't think of a single year since I first got involved in this in 2001. Actually, if you go to the district council to 1987, when the council didn't overspend its budget. So I think an underspend is incredibly unusual, and I think it's down to the fact that the officers worked very hard to deliver that. The reserves we've got, I would say, are still on the low side compared to any other organisation or local authority across the country. But when you're faced with having to find £40 million worth of savings, don't you honestly think it makes sense to be a little bit prudent, which is what we're doing, and to err on the side of caution? When we've got through all this and made all the savings we need, 80 million over 3 years, once we've achieved that, then we'll be in a position to look at where we can reinvest, and that will happen. But to be frank, I think it would be incredibly dangerous at this stage to start flittering money away. And as I said before, it's very easy to spend other people's money. Alan?
I thought from over then the Lib Dems were proposing deeper cuts so that you could have in reserve that you could then offset in the way that she was suggesting.
Can I just make a comment there? I mean, let's not forget this, why we've ended up in this state we've ended up in. It's nothing to do with the Conservative government that we've ended up with a massive deficit nationally. Now, you can argue whether it was Gordon Brown's fault or an international situation. I don't think that matters. But we're faced with a situation we have before us. And if Labour win the next election, that we'll be in exactly the same position because they're keeping to exactly the same spending cuts as the coalition is. So I think, instead of talking about spending money, we should be focusing on dealing with the problems that we have, which are not going to go away.
I find it ironic that you say that the Conservatives have nothing to do with the world financial crisis that has resulted in some of the economic circumstances.
Like Gordon Brown selling all the gold at the lowest point in the market for 100 years.
That we find ourselves in, being that the Conservative Party is riddled with bankers, financiers and financed by the same to a significant extent, and that you represent that party as strongly as anyone who likes it.
And Alan, tell me, how many working class men and women are in the Labour Party in Parliament? Or how many barristers and how many people associated with the banking industry are in your party? There are plenty. Look at it. Look at the statistics.
I haven't a clue. I can't answer that question. Nor could argue answer the question how many millionaires are in yours at this point in time. But I think the point that I'm making is quite obvious and is apparent to everyone. There might be some pride in having achieved that the budget and come as close to the budget as this return obviously shows. But that pride needs to be tempered and ought to be erased when there is an understanding of how that has occurred. It's occurred by significant and very significant in some areas cuts in services. It's been achieved by massive cuts in employment with the impact on individuals, on services, and on the economy.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question, Alan? You had, as I said to Annie, at the budget meeting where we plan these things for the next 3 years, you had an opportunity. If you genuinely hand on heart believe that we were cutting from the wrong areas, or we shouldn't be cutting, you had an opportunity in a public forum to say that and say where the money was going to come from. And do you know what you came up with? Absolutely nothing. So I really don't think you've got an awful lot of substance in what you're saying. If you really meant what you're saying, you'd have come forward with alternative suggestions.
The comments that we made about them right from the start of this cut scenario was that these were not the extent of the cuts that we would be proposing and not implementing in the way in which we'd like to see. We're not yet. This is your philosophy and your strategy and a Tory ideology that's being implemented, and quite frankly, we're not going to intervene in any way to improve that. It is your position, it is your budget, these are your massive cuts, and obviously they'll be judged.
So what you're saying, right? As an opposition party, you came forward with exactly nothing. If you thought we were cutting too harsh and we shouldn't close day centres or whatever else, you could have come forward with an alternative proposition. But do you know what you came forward with, Alan? Exactly what you did for the last 3, 4, 5 years. Absolutely nothing. And that's all we're hearing. It's easy to stand on the sideline and criticise. It's very easy. But it's a damn sight hard to come up with some original thinking. I'm afraid you haven't done that.
The situation is that we're having these cuts as a result of the Conservative Lib Dem coalition imposing them
Labour
upon
mismanagement
the
for years.
imposing them upon the council. They are being managed in the way in which the Conservative ideology dictates, which is based on a complete denial of the value of public service and a desire to develop privatisation policies, commissioning out to various organisations, and a diminution of the public sector, particularly the local government sector. However, what I was going to move on to ask about, because it's clearly intrinsic to these cuts, are the impact and the ongoing impact on employment for the council. We did have some suggestions some time ago about 1,300, 1,500 jobs going. What is the current count in terms of jobs lost within the authority at the end of this outturn period, and what are the projections of further jobs in terms of the level of compulsory redundancy that's going to be implemented, presumably very soon?
Well, the first point is we've been incredibly open and straightforward about the fact that job losses were going to happen. We talked about this 3 years ago. And 12, 18 months ago, Clive? It's not a secret. When an awful lot of our spend goes on salaries and we have to save money, jobs were bound to go. But the good news, which you might like to celebrate, is unemployment in Shropshire is the lowest in the West Midlands and still falling. The fact that jobs have been lost by Shropshire Council hasn't had an impact on the unemployment figures must indicate that the private sector is taking up a lot of people in posts. Or, as a young lady who left us, I had a conversation with her when we had the fair on the landing. She said, I've worked for the council for 14 years and thoroughly enjoyed it, but I had my own business, and her business, she draws pets, and she's brilliant. And she said the fact that I could go for voluntary redundancy, the money that I got from that was like give me a security to start my own business. And her business is flourishing. She's doing commissions for Saudi Arabia, for America, for Canada, all over this country. So a lot of our staff are going on, and it's not just getting other jobs, but creating jobs for themselves and other people. And, you know, let's be real about this. This is the first time in my memory, I've done this the first time in your memory, James, that we've delivered an underspend on budget.
We've been very close on the time.
But this is the first.
I don't forget about it.
Possibly the first. And rather than actually carving on about the fact and making it sound like it's something bad, This is something that's incredibly positive, and the staff sitting in this room, around the table out there, are why we delivered it. And instead of carping on and moaning, we should be congratulating them, which is what I'm doing.
I'm not carping on about the officers who are merely carrying out the task of the ruling administration. What I'm saying is that behind all your praise and patting yourselves on the back about this outturn, there are significant costs that have been imposed on the residents of Shropshire. There are significantly more to come, which will be causing damage to individuals and communities. That's what I was trying to say. I too think that James and his colleagues have done a good job, as have many staff within the department, in having to cope with the strictures that you are imposing on them, and which are detailed within this report and the outcome. Just one final point for me, Keith, and that, referring to adult services, clearly there is an overspend there, which has been something that we've seen for the last few years. But there is one point that stands out, and we've discussed this in council. This is the overspend on staffing budgets and the cost of legal advice relating to the judicial review. Now, I'm sure that people will be interested in what these costs are, because I've just received information that the council is going to have to pay the cost of the complainants in this, and that the findings that relate to Hartley's are now moved over to cover Sabrina Court, and also the Inish House original is Inish Court, is it? Forget me. It is also covered in an order that's just been issued, and within that order there is an instruction that complainants' costs must be found by this council. Now, are we aware of this? Have we got any idea of how much this debacle relating to the council's failures in consultation are going to cost? And there wasn't any apology from the full council when this was raised. I wonder if people ought to be making an apology about these costs and about the turmoil it's caused and the damage that it's caused at this point in time.
The answer to your question is no. You know more than we do. We haven't heard that, but your source is obviously different to ours. The second point is, whoever pays the costs is coming out of the public purse because it's paid for by legal aid or us, so it's the public purse that will suffer. And we don't have any other answers to that. But in the fullness of time, I'm still speaking, as these things come out, we know what the situation is. It will be published.
Well, just for your information, it's not nothing sort of particularly confidential about this, I'm sure, but I've just got a copy that I received some time ago, actually, which is a consent order which is signed by a senior officer of this council, which is ordered and declared that the claimant's application for judicial review is withdrawn. It's declared that the defendant, in breach of its common law duty, fails to consult the use of Sabrina Court and their carers before deciding to close the centre. It is also determined that the defendant pays the claimant's costs in relation to these proceedings to be assessed if not agreed. As I say, that is signed by a representative of the solicitors who representing some of these claimants, and it's also signed by a senior officer of this council. Well, and it's stated the... I can't see the time, sorry.
We can comment because we haven't seen it, and we've got Claire sitting next to me and she knows nothing. So email it to Claire and we'll look at it. Okay? Anything else? Right, well, I think it's good news even if some don't. And I think the fact that Alan likes to gloss over 13 years of Labour running the country before we came into this mess, I find quite humorous. And the fact, if you look around the country, what other authorities are doing, the City of Newcastle cut the budget of 2.6 million to culture completely. Just look around at what's happening in Wolverhampton, look across the border at Wrexham, where Plasmatic Leisure Centre has been demolished. You know, and you talk about ideology, conservative ideology, it's complete, that's a nonsense on it. Anyway,
there is a common feature there. We got me off.
Yes, I have.
I'm still on though. The common feature is a conservative national government
No.
is imposing these things
No.
based on their
The common factor is 13 years of social dogma, socialism and socialism dogma in Westminster that's got us in this mess. That's the truth of it. And we're all having trying to make the best of a bad job. And to be quite frank with you, I think in Shropshire we're doing a damn good job. Okay. We all happy with that? Yeah. Thank you. Which leads us on to item 8, capital outturn, Michael.
The capital outturn report sets out the final position on the capital programme for the year and shows total expenditure of 40.7 million, which represents 86% of the reprofiled budget. The budget spend of 6.6 million has arisen due to delays in delivery of schemes, and these budgets have been slipped into 2014-15 in order to meet the continued delivery of the capital projects. Capital receipts of £7.6 million were generated during the course of 13-14. In addition to those brought forward from previous years, this has enabled 13.2 million to be carried forward to meet the 2014-15 capital programme. The temporary surplus of receipts also enables the council to achieve a one-off saving in the revenue budget of £530,000 in 2014-15. Leader, I move the recommendations contained in paragraph 2.
Okay, thank you. All happy? Okay, thank you. Which leads us to Treasury Management. Item 9. Michael.
The report outlines the Treasury management activities of the Council in the last quarter. During the final quarter of 2013-14, the internal Treasury team achieved a return of 0.59% on the Council's cash balances, outperforming the benchmark by 0.30%. This amounts to an additional income of 92,100 during the quarter. During 13-14, Treasury management savings of 1.32 million were generated by not undertaking borrowing and delivering higher than estimated returns. The final outturn position will be reported in the annual Treasury report. I move the recommendation 2-1 to this report.
Thank you. I will second that. And again, can you pass on our thanks to the officers involved in that work? They're doing a fantastic good job. All happy?
Yep.
Item 10, Michael again, charging policy. You're a busy day today, man.
Yeah, I have spoken to James.
Does he listen?
This report is being considered by Cabinet ahead of Council on the 17th of July. The Council receives over 57 million from fees and charges income, and it's important that there is a clear policy in place for setting these. Policy itself is clearly attached at Appendix 1. So year on year, changes to fees and charges will continue to be agreed by Council annually as part of the budget process. In addition to the annual approval process, the report seeks agreement for directors in consultation with the appropriate portfolio holder to be given delegated authority to approve any in-year charges to fees and charges which are necessary. This will provide some flexibility to respond appropriately to market changes and service design. Any in-year changes will be agreed within the proposed charging policy and within the Council's rules. I move the recommendations in paragraph 2.
Okay, thank you. Alan first, then Hannah.
I think this, overall, this is a slight a change that does take away the balance of power from the Cabinet, from the Council, towards officers and individual portfolio holders. There's further movement in that direction. But I can understand why it might be necessary in certain circumstances. But I cannot let this go by without saying that there is considerable controversy, Chair, about the charges that have been imposed on the museum and art gallery in Shrewsbury, and significant public feeling that there needs to be changes made to this. So I'd ask that that be considered as soon as possible, particularly bearing in mind that within this policy, on page 77, it says charges should be used with a tool to manage demand or influence behaviour through encouraging the use of the service. And then other parts on page 80, we say that the corporate charging principle should take account of the ability of different users to pay through the use of discounts and concessions. And later on down that page, you say the setting of fees and charges will take into account the ability of customers to pay and any relevant socio-economic factors. I'm pleased to see that those are incorporated into the policy, but would just say that large numbers of people are discouraged from attending the museum and art gallery because of the charges that are placed upon it, which for a family are very significant. And I would ask you to look at very quickly, because we've promised this for some time now, to look at the policy on discounts and concessions, particularly for residents of Shropshire, and particularly to look at the idea that is used in many other places where there are charges of having free opportunities for local residents to attend something that is a gem, and I've been there myself, and it is a great facility. But it's something that we should be enabling people to experience time after time, and particularly enabling the residents of Shrewsbury and Shropshire who are paying for this facility to attend, irrespective of their economic means.
Good. And where would you suggest the money comes from? Maybe you should have done this in the budget meeting. You see, I'm giving you tips for next year.
You could
have done this.
If I were
come with a proposition.
If I were to take your tips, I'm sure that not only would my party disenfranchise me, but also the residents that I represent would get rid of me pretty quickly. I'd also wish to commit myself to mental hospital. We've talked about we've talked about the situation related to the music hall. I'm sure that if we had a decent donation scheme, that donation scheme would finance the loss of income that would come about by concessions, that would come about through concessions,
we'll get
through some free places for local residents.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting, your donation schemes within museums. It all sounds very good, but we've got a huge pile of evidence which says that all the museums which are free to enter have donations boxes there. There's about 10% of the income estimated from a small charge for entrance fee in comparison. The figures just don't stack up on donations alone. I was in the Imperial War Museum in Manchester on Saturday afternoon. Donations boxes everywhere. You can count the pennies and the pound coins on one hand. It just doesn't stack up, Alan.
Yeah. Anything else? Are we all happy with that?
Yes.
Go on, Hannah, close there.
Thank you, Chair. My concern with this policy is with the change in the decision-making procedure going to portfolio holders is the lack of visibility and the lack of debate and discussion around likely changes.
Yeah.
The example I'd like to draw your attention to is the 16 plus transport charges, which are almost doubling for some families, and I recognise that the council has delayed.
That's not come under fees and charges. It's a completely different area.
No, but
Karen sitting next to you will tell you. And to be truthful, what this says is that the fees and charges will come to full council like they normally do every year. But let's give you an example. Let's say the bid scheme in Shrewsbury wanted to reduce the charges on parking as a way of generating more footfall. That process, once this goes through, can be made by the cabinet holder rather than having to go through a committee process. So it allows more flexibility, really. It's not about putting charges up, but the fees and charges will come to full council as always.
But hearing the opinions of the service users and having the opportunity to hear as much from the people who will be affected by changes is hugely important, and this process will make that less likely. Charging principle 2 does talk about maximising income, and it's quite a strong thread through this that income to the council should be maximised.
Yes, but
with various provisos.
you're making an assumption there that to maximise income involves increasing charges. Maximising income could quite easily be proved many times that you wouldn't get buy one get one free offers in supermarkets. By having special offers and reducing costs, you can often generate more income.
My point being that there is a thread here that clearly states that council wishes to maximise income through charging, however it sees it should do that. It's a delicate balance in the change in this decision-making process. There's less opportunity for all the various people that would have a valued and informed opinion about how those changes might affect people to have their say.
I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong because the normal fees and charges will come to full council as it always does. This is only in the interim if there's some specific reason they want to be varied in one way or another. So the main core will be, I'm guessing, not an awful lot of changes will take place. You know, and it'll just go through the normal process. So I think the worry needs.
It will still be the case that the portfolio holder will be able to make a decision in closed session about making changes to charges as a result of this paper.
You still have to consult anyway. So.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. West Mercia Energy. Conjuring. Guess who?
This report is necessary to seek Cabinet approval to amend the joint agreement for West Mercia Energy. The amendments will extend the agreement to the 31st of March 2020 and give approval for future trading opportunities as set out in the report. The revised joint agreement is attached to Appendix A, and I move the recommendations A to D inclusive.
Okay. All happy with that?
Yeah.
Good. Item 12, Commission Strategy. Well, this has been around for quite a long time. I think one of the positive things with this, it will give more clarity to the voluntary organisations across the county, and that's what we've been asking for, and I move the report as urgent.
Agree.
Hannah, make your mic on.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Can I just ask whether you were pleased or disappointed with the number of respondents to the consultation, which the report says was 29?
I'd like more, wouldn't we all? But you can't make people respond. Do you want to comment, George?
I think quite a lot of work was done with a lot of those people out there that are in the provider market that very much this is aimed towards. And we worked with them to help shape that. So one could say that a no response is actually that the views were reflected based on the work that we did in advance with them. Notwithstanding though, some of those people that we did work with did also respond and add some very useful comments, particularly around definition of customers, stakeholders, citizens that were referred to in the commissioning strategy. But we did do quite a lot of work in advance with a lot of the provider market so that it was fit for purpose going forward.
Okay. All happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Item 12, Tim. 13, item 13, Tim.
I'm letting this up. This is the Q4 performance report, which you've all seen before in this format. Next quarter, it will come in a revised format, we've looked at before. But at this stage, this report summarises the latest measures of performance relating to the 4 priorities for Shropshire Council: keeping people safe, high quality education, looking after vulnerable people and economic growth. In summary, more than 3/4 of the outcome and measures relating to people who use our services are on or above the planned level of performance, and more than half demonstrating improvement compared to Q4 12-13. Better performance than expected, and improvements from previous year follow the trend over the last few quarters. But at the same time, it's evident the level of demand is increasing on some of the council's services. In particular, you can see when you look at the performance measures relating to children and young people, particularly those that keep children and young people safe, you see that more children have become looked after, 12.5% increase from March 2013 to this year. more children have a child protection plan, and therefore there's obviously an increased pressure. Some of that, of course, is to do with what we've been doing to try and ensure that we recognise issues earlier on in preventative terms rather than waiting them to present as a problem. Most of those increase in referrals come specifically from that area. I'm sure if anybody wants to discuss it further, Karen can answer that. We continue to enable more adult social care clients to have control of their own lives and decide how they use funding, which we think is positive. And people born in this county continue to have a life expectancy that is higher than the national average. A marked reduction in the number of people who have to stay in hospital after they're ready to leave has been noticed over the last 12 months. That means that's mainly down to the fact that we're much better, we're getting better all the time in supporting people to live in their own homes. And that's borne out when you look at the number of people aged between 18 and 64 who need adult social care support. We've reduced the rate of residential care by more than 50%, which is incredibly positive for those individuals and reflects a lot of hard work. And we're helping increasing numbers of older people to stay in their home and remain as independent as possible. And again, all this is good, all this ticks the boxes that people want to stay in their own homes, not end up, as my mother sadly is, and a number of people's relatives have been, in residential care. If we look at business confidence, we see it's improving, more people are employed and self-employed, and with the number claiming JSA lowest since December 2008. However, there are some issues there. We still have long-term benefit claims significantly higher than December 2008. That's an area where we have to continue to work. Education achievement is high, and Shropshire has comparatively low levels of children living in poverty compared to all England and indeed the West Midlands. And a significant majority of children completing year 11 in our schools go on full-time education. And finally, we'll talk about leisure facilities as we discussed them earlier. Significantly more people are visiting the theatre, the museums, libraries and leisure facilities than last year, especially in the final quarter of last year, which is very encouraging. So with that minor commentary, I'll move the recommendations in paragraph 2.
Anna.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on the point about admissions to residential care for adults, in that it's an area that's difficult. When there's a strong policy direction to keep people in their own homes, there's always going to be danger that they're kept in their own homes too long when it's not appropriate and they're perhaps not getting the right level of care. Can you tell me what safeguards we're putting in against that, given that this policy is taking a stronger shift perhaps in more recent years than it did previously? Thank you.
I could do that, but it would be treading on the toes of my colleague on the other side of the table. But I'll happily comment if you wish, but maybe Lee would like to.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment. I think the issue is around what support is appropriate and to what extent the people who call upon us for support would like their support based. And clearly, from this isn't necessarily about cost. This is about outcomes. So this is about supporting people in the environment that they feel is most appropriate. Clearly, depending on the level of support that we provide and that they may themselves contribute to, depending on their circumstances, staying in their own home may be more expensive. But it's about getting the best outcomes. There may well come a time, particularly if their needs develop to the point where they're more dependent on nursing support, then clearly a residential or nursing care environment would be more appropriate to meet their needs. So it's about responding to those needs.
Okay. I've never found anyone that actually aspires to end up in the hospital. Okay, we happy with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 14. Someone like to move?
Move.
Second? Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Press. You have to exclude you.